The opening sequence of episode 54 is a really interesting one, since it has to deal with the immediate ramifications of a huge character death, while not just maintaining momentum, but actually accelerating. And so, we open with a classic case of simply reframing Erwin's charge. Only this time, the music doesn't frame it as this somber sacrifice or even final moments. No, it is just one more move in this constant game of back and forth. Erwin goes down, but we don't roll the intro just yet. No, we continue going as his horse goes tumbling. That entire emotional climax becomes just another body in this sea of corpses. So while Flock screams out for Erwin, Marlowe realigns their sights and just shouts to keep going. We have very few deaths of this caliber in the story, and even more so, ones that function as a basically cliffhanger in the middle of a conflict. So I think this episode really effectively leverages that insane emotional baggage to really drive home this idea that this is a conflict the likes of which we simply have not seen before. The greatest hype man Erwin dies, and there is no hype. The horses trample his nigh-dead body, and they simply keep charging. As for the title of the episode, Hero, well, I think there is one very obvious candidate, but really, I think you can apply this to just about everyone in this episode. Erwin is the fallen hero who gave up everything to defeat Zeke. Marlowe and Flock are heroes of parody, currently giving their lives for a future. Levi is humanity's hero, bringing down the Beast Titan. Eren is the hope of humanity and the great hero who brought down the Colossal Titan. Mikasa is a hero who blew the Armor Titan sky high. Hanji quite literally rose from the ashes. This episode is super high stakes, so just about everyone could realistically get the title. That said, I think this episode is pretty clearly Armin's, who, just like Erwin, gave up on his own dreams and willingly charged into his death. Not to repeat myself later, just hold that thought for now. But, in a extremely roundabout way, and bear with me here, I think you could even make a case for Zeke being a hero. And I guess speaking of, let us move right into the episode and explore that. We open with Zeke mumbling to himself about how it's pathetic they never learned anything from history, then saying that it is a great tragedy that King Fritz took away their memories and essentially doomed them to die within the walls. Very recently, we already saw how Eren is basically a vehicle for Grisha's unfulfilled goals. So yeah, even on a micro scale, history is very much being repeated. Unbeknownst to us, their entire generational hatred thing of course goes much deeper because well, you know, Eren is actually the one fueling the cycle, but it is also the owl who gives Grisha the Titan originally, thereby literally continuing the cycle, but the owl is also just Eren, so well, you get the idea. Ditto for all of those Ymir and Historia parallels that we haven't seen yet, but they're very explicitly showing us that this cycle is being repeated even 2,000 years later. Eventually, Historia does of course break the cycle, I mean that's her entire story, but that was a very costly thing to do. And with Zeke saying that it is a great tragedy that they were just doomed to die here, he is actually just repeating what the scouts debated back in the Rod-Ross Titan arc. Parody, or paradise depending on how you want to call it, as the name suggests, was supposed to be a paradise that allowed the Eldians to live in basically ignorant bliss. Parody itself is a gorgeous island. Their memories of the outside world where there were wars and stuff were taken away, and they were protected by the Wall Titans. It was supposed to be this paradise where nothing can hurt them. Thing is, there's a little caveat there, because ignorance isn't really bliss when you have man-eating monsters attacking the island. Theoretically, the scouts simply shouldn't have ventured beyond the walls at all, and they would have been perfectly fine. But still, it is certainly not a paradise by any stretch, even before Marley blows the whole thing wide open. So yeah, Zeke is absolutely right. It is a tragedy that, in the words of Armin, they basically were forced to become just birds in a cage. And not just birds in a cage, but basically blind birds in a cage. Not only were they trapped, but they also didn't even know what they were trapped by. Ignorance, yes. Ignorant bliss, certainly not. But Zeke keeps cooking because he then says, from elderly to children, they fight to the death, and they'll justify it with some nonsense about dying honorably. Considering the title of this episode is literally Hero, and just how much we talk about these heroic sacrifices in the name of humanity, Zeke offers a directly opposing, and albeit quite naive and idyllic, but a very simple perspective. Charging into your death isn't heroic, it is a waste of life that should have never happened in the first place. Now, obviously, that is very rich coming from the person who is currently creating the, let's call it circumstances of their deaths, but the idea of that statement is undeniable. And to very explicitly showcase this, we see him accidentally crush the rocks in his hand, then asking, why is he getting so worked up about this? And he also adds that he is not like his father and that it's important to have fun in everything you do. At this point in the story, unless you had picked up on the whole pointy ears thing, we of course don't yet know that his father is Grisha. But in this very battle, we are seeing the outcome of two factions, or two sons, being raised on hatred. The thing with Zeke is that, sort of like Eren embodying that dream of a better tomorrow but the hatred of yesterday, he too has two very, very different states of mind. One of them is that carefree, ha-ha funny monkey playing baseball. One whose primary role model and mentor was an inquisitive mind, simply pursuing the truths of the world that had gotten lost in the fog of war. But the other side of Zeke is dead serious, deeply cynical, and a very, very scarred personality. One who sees his father's philosophy causing hundreds of people to face meaningless deaths. One whose primary mentor was driven so far in his hatred of himself that he almost, well, you know. We'll dive much deeper into all of this when we actually get to the euthanasia plan, but I think much of Zeke's philosophy is based on Arthur Schopenhauer, who we've actually already talked about in the series, by the way. For an extremely simplified explanation, he argued that life as a whole is suffering and that no amount of good could ever outweigh that. He believed that humanity's endless pursuits of desires always results in more pain than pleasure. And because of that, the idea itself of being born is needless pain that should not have been caused. Those are the fundamentals of Zeke's entire euthanasia plan and what he's talking about here. Them charging into their deaths is a tragedy because the only thing they ever saw in their lifetimes was pain. It makes him angry that they are unironically coping that it was some honorable act and not just misery. For him, nothing about this should be idealized. They didn't deserve any of it. They died a sad death after a lifetime of sad suffering. Not to open that can of worms just yet, plenty more on this as we get to Season 4, because while the outlook Schopenhauer presented was very, very bleak, it definitely wasn't as simple as, well, everyone should just cease to exist. But to loop back to that episode title, this is why I think Zeke views himself as almost a hero, not just for parody, but Eldia in general. He comes to the island hoping to get the Founding Titan, and unlike Fritz, who wanted to create this ignorant bliss that only resulted in more death, Zeke has an actual plan to end suffering. The means of that are, well, pretty spicy, but the end result would be an absolute end to Eldian suffering without having to be wiped out by titans or bullets. And of course, all of this is beautifully contrasted by Carla's line of Eren being special for the simple reason of having been born. So yes, Isayama was definitely writing fire here with all the different questions of morality that are raised, especially considering they often come from directly opposing sides and sides we perceive as the bad guys. Plenty more on this soon, TM. And to do a complete 180, we cut on over to Marlowe, where things are a whole lot more personal and there really are no ambiguous, abstract morality questions. We hear this slow piano tapping as the entire world slows to a crawl, with Marlowe just asking, "I wonder what Hitch is doing right now." Knowing her, she's probably still sleeping. That sounds so nice. But then, immediately asking, "What am I doing all the way out here?" Before we get to the lines themselves, there is a slight dub versus sub difference here. The dub just makes a very clear follow-up to the Hitch question with,
"Why am I thinking about her at a time like this?"
Whereas the sub is a bit more ambiguous with it just being, "What am I doing?" I think the obvious interpretation is that the sub is just an incomplete thought of exactly the same thing. As in, what am I doing thinking of Hitch at a time like this? But personally, I also like the interpretation where he has this moment of thinking of Hitch, thinking of her face just peacefully sleeping, and it's that exact thought that makes his own brain short-circuit a little. Like we already saw during the Scouts' meeting and Jean roasting him there, clearly Hitch had some sort of feelings for Marlowe. So now realizing that this is where he dies, perhaps he too has some sort of realization that he felt something for her. But now, he will never be able to tell her that. And so, the only thought that comes to his mind is a very simple, "What am I doing all the way out here?" As in, why did I ever leave the interior? I think the simplicity of that statement really cuts deep because I think it really embodies that sense of, in the end, the only thing that mattered in their lives were the people. Which again, also nicely contrasts to all the themes of people being slaves to their dreams we see throughout the season. Unfortunately, just like with Marco, I do think that Marlowe's death is somewhat overshadowed by everything else going on. And in the long run, that is doubly true with Flock, because Well, he survives this whole ordeal. But I think Marlowe's character serves a beautiful purpose of being this almost alternate Eren. He charged to his death time and time again, telling himself that all of this is for something greater. But on death's door, he finally realized that the only thing he truly valued was right next to him the entire time. Transpose that sentence to Eren, and, well, it's Eren's story. And the saddest part is that, just like with Eren, he goes down, and that is it. There is no big emotional moment, nothing. He died, and we simply keep going. Though with Zeke finally wiping out the rest of the scouts, he notices that the right flank of his titans is also entirely wiped out. And so with that, let us get to one of, if not the most hyped sequence in the entirety of Season 3, and maybe the entire series. Before we start to bask in the glory that is the sequence, the eye candy that was the Kenny chase scene, of course done none other by the legend Arifumi Imai himself, took about a month to produce. In large part because most of the backgrounds are entirely CG, which of course massively speeds things along. So naturally, you might wonder what a mostly hand-drawn version of such a sequence might look like. Well, luckily for us, we have an answer because straight from the man's mouth, Levi vs. Zeke took about a month to storyboard and 3 to draw. So yeah, not really sustainable. That said, I don't think I'll ever forget that goofy side-eye from Zeke as the flare smoke parts and Levi just shoots through. The way we swing from that constant death on the scouts' part to Levi Beyblading across Zeke's arm has to be one of the most satisfying things in Attack on Titan. With every other shifter, we've had problems even breaking through to them. Annie first called the Titans to her, then there was the whole crystal thing, Reiner is armored by default, Bertolt is just way too steamy. But with Zeke? Well, with Zeke we go full throttle right away. And what gets me every single time is how we then flash back to a conversation between the Marley squad. And the only thing we hear is Reiner just warning Zeke about Levi and Levi alone. Like, out of context, that is hilarious to me. Imagine having this whole grand siege plan to capture what to them is basically a god. But the only thing Zeke is warned about is Levi. Not that I blame them, I mean, Lil Beyblade Man has more than earned his title, but it's still pretty funny. Animation-wise, we also get a whole lot more of his signature spirally ODM gear strings. But what I really love in this little opening bit is the framing of the sequence itself. Our perspective character is the big monkey. Levi is the predator currently tearing him apart. I think it further builds that incredible suspense because for us, even Levi now feels distance. Ditto for the music, it's just this cold ambient piano. Levi is this cold predator just ruthlessly tearing him apart. It is a beautiful juxtaposition of a lot of tenseness and also no tenseness at all. Another thing that I absolutely love here is how Levi brings Zeke down. I've seen some people say that this is just his rage manifested, as in he doesn't go in for the kill on purpose. He slowly carves him apart to just inflict as much pain as possible. But yeah, I don't think so. The entire method of first arms, then eyes, then legs is exactly what we saw with the squad during the Annie mission. Difference between them and Levi is that he can do all of that solo. So yes, Levi is currently burning up from the inside, but this methodical carving of Zeke, I don't think it is just rage. It's a very practical concern of bringing him down completely and ensuring that he is well and truly done. All the slicey dices are still absolutely glorious though. Another small detail that I love here is how Levi is constantly changing his grip. Something we basically never see, even with the likes of Mikasa. Multiple times we see him go from right hand forward with an inverse grip to right hand forward with a normal grip. To him, his swords are basically an extension of his arm. At every opportunity, he will switch to maximize the damage he can inflict with his existing momentum. I just love how smooth it is. His combat style is hands down my favorite in the series, and it's not even close. And alright, I have no idea how this would work because it probably wouldn't, but scenes like this has me dreaming of a FromSoft Attack on Titan game. This scene of Zeke going down just needs that great enemy feld overlay. And I also absolutely love how we see Zeke within the Titan. It's almost as if the ground he just stood upon had fallen out from beneath his feet and his lumbering body just comes crashing down. And the fisheye shot with the very clever smoke transition, by the way, is also beautiful. And of course, the money shots. We get this incredible sequence of Levi flipping through the air and then this almost GoPro shot of his ODM gear adjusting his movements. And Levi then absolutely annihilates Zeke's other hand before zooming back on over to his torso. And fun fact, there is literally one frame from Zeke's hand being pristine to having 9 slashes all throughout. So yeah, if we talked about Zeke throwing stuff at Mach 2, this Beyblade might give him a run for his money. And of course, the zoom-out warp perspective shot we get of Levi spinning on top of Zeke has to be one of the most iconic shots in the entire series. Considering how the entirety of Attack on Titan's story had played out thus far, it is absolutely insane to think that we went from this dude single-handedly wiping out the entirety of Erwin's squad to being completely humiliated a couple of episodes later. This isn't even being torn limb from limb, this is being carved up like a, I don't know, like bread? Bread has a lot of slices, I guess. Bread aside though, those warp perspective shots were always with specialty, and I absolutely love how seamlessly they integrate that slightly surreal perspective to even further accentuate the events on screen. One thing that always surprised me though is how they chose to portray Levi's slicey dices, because normally I would say this is a little bit over the top for a series like Attack on Titan. I mean, look at it, it looks like SEO sword skills. But the thing is, despite having those typical lightning-fast anime slicey dices, it still doesn't feel like too much because it still feels visceral. In large part, I think that is because of how the fight actually ends. Those slicey dices, they don't finish the fights. The thing that actually ends the fight is a very, very weighty cleave that is also further accentuated by the immediately preceding scene of Levi locking in his stance. So yeah, as much as I joke about Levi being a literal Beyblade, the final scene of this fight is something we know very, very well and definitely doesn't feel over the top. It is just one massive cleave that covers half the screen in blood, and it is glorious. Oh yeah, and some of the frames you get in between here are also so clean, it is insane. The one and only thing I could ever nitpick in the sequence is the ground. The skies and the clouds are gorgeous as usual, but in some of these shots, the ground does unfortunately look a little bit bland and a little PS2 era. But okay, let's be real here, if you're nitpicking literal grass, that probably means you should touch a little bit more grass. Also, not sure how intentional this is, but the shots we get of Levi standing atop Zeke definitely seem evocative of No Regrets and Levi standing alone after losing Isabel. Hello, it is time for a Paths intermission because while we're still gushing about the animation, here is a bombshell that my dumb brain didn't realize in the previous episode. You know that Zeke throwing scene I spent like a good paragraph talking about? Yeah, so it's literally a scene from season 2. Yeah, when he was fighting Monke, it's the same thing. Thank you John Wick for pointing this out. This is very valuable information that will not live rent-free in my head for the rest of days. Thank you. But okay, as much as I joke about it, obviously it doesn't take away anything from the scene. It is still a very, very good scene, and I mean, there's a lot of cleverly reused animation with Zeke anyway, so this is just something I didn't notice, and now I want you to notice. I want you to notice forever, just like me. Just like me, you're going to know that it's the same scene. Same Monke scene. And not only did Monke die, Erwin also died. To the same scene. As Levi's mind begins to drift to someone, anyone he could give the injection and turn them into a Titan, we get this really gnarly zoom-out shot of the scouts' bodies, broken and contorted. There is obviously some very, very heavy censorship here, but the scene itself is still pretty chilling. And the music here, man, I need a FromSoft game so much. Problem is, as Levi's mind drifts to Erwin, Pieck pops up and yoinks Zeke. I know a ton of people have wondered, where in the bloody hell was she even at during the entire Zeke versus Levi standoff? Personally, I think there are two answers to that. First off, the fight itself probably lasted like all of 30 seconds. If episode runtime-wise it was like 1 minute, I think if you cut out all the mini flashbacks and all the slow-motion accentuated cleaves, etc., it is like 20 to 30 seconds at the absolute most. So even if she was nearby, it would still just take time to get to them. And more importantly, numero 2, remember that she was constantly running around and looking for new rocks for Zeke. So yes, she was basically that community meme of coming back with pizzas only to see the entire room on fire. But hands down the best scene here is as they run off, Levi just standing there and mumbling to himself. It is so hopeless and just so tired, it's brilliant. But something that I think a whole lot of people tend to overlook is that this scene right here reveals something absolutely massive. Zeke is commanding the Titans while in his human form. The only other person we've seen do this is Eren, and with him, that is pretty clearly implied to be this weird mystical coordinates. So considering all the royal blood talk we already had with Astoria, I think this tiny scene right here could fundamentally start shifting how you think about the bigger story. And, well, we know it did. Zeke's royal blood is the thing that shapes, like, most of Season 4. Okay, but why does the Titan look like Casca? Though as we cut back to Levi, he just says he made a promise, that of course being getting Zeke's head. And so, he reloads his swords and continues his Beyblade activities. Levi's promise to Erwin and his hatred of Zeke will continue to be a huge part of his story moving forward. So I think this is just a nice intro to the now changed Levi post Erwin's death. Somehow, some way, he has grown even more cold. And for another very chilling scene, we pop back on over to Flock, who wakes up among the bodies just muttering, "Why am I alive?" Which, you know, probably messes up a person pretty bad. Actually, scratch that, definitely messes up a person very bad. As we cut on over to the inside of Shiganshina, we get some more of that mirroring of Erwin and Armin. Just like Levi in the previous episode, Jean says the most they can hope for is just getting Eren out. And considering how this episode ends, those parallels will very much continue. Though Armin notices that Bertholdt has lost some weight, first wondering what exercise plan is he on, but then screaming out that Hanji was right. The Titan powers are not infinite. If Eren's multiple transformations drained his stamina, then battery steam must be draining his extremely quickly considering his size. But most importantly, it is that line about his skeleton remaining intact that you need to pay attention to if you are an overanalysis enjoyer. First, because, well, you know, that's the whole backbone, get it, backbone, because we're talking about bones of the entire plan, and that enables their victory. But two, because it again brings up a ton of questions about trust. We've talked plenty about trust, probably too much before, and at this point I think I need to make a separate video on that, but TLDR, I don't subscribe to the idea that he can instantly just vaporize himself, and I consider his disappearance there a basically plot hole. Personally, I think Isayama was either still figuring out his movesets, or maybe he didn't want to ruin the mystery of us already seeing Burrito's remains. I guess the simplest way to put it is that if Reiner had enough time to store his consciousness in his... then Bass Guitar definitely should have had more than enough time to vaporize himself, considering his best was like, what, 0.5 seconds? Trust weirdness aside, just like Levi and Erwin, Armin proclaims that he does actually have a plan, only for Jean to call him an idiot and say that it took him long enough. And it's here where the episode pivots to absolute emotional devastation, because on a rewatch, you obviously know that Armin knows exactly what he's going to do. He talked to Bertholdt face to face, he knows there is no holding back against him, and he knows that his dream is about to be burned to ash. And so those scenes of him just smiling as he gets to Eren, it's just such a gut punch, because like, this is a war zone, and he's just smiling. And to again contrast Trust, we again see him stab Eren, saying it's time for them to go and see the ocean. I guess me talking about all of these scenes, despite Armin clearly surviving, kind of says enough. Whether it's your first or 100th time watching this, it is absolutely gut-wrenching just watching Armin's dream crumble right before his eyes. And before we continue with them, we jump on over to the mid-card, talking about the outside world. This is essentially just a chapter from Armin's book that we've talked about plenty before, so not much else to say there. Returning to the episode, we get this beautiful, slightly surreal sequence as Armin explains the plan, while the rest of the world almost watches over them. And again, I think this is meant to mirror Erwin. For him, it was the many scouts who gave their lives for the cause. For Armin, on the other hand, the fate of humanity, the fate of Astoria, of Hitch, and everyone else really does currently lie in his hands. And on top of that, I think there's also that dimension of the rest of the world not even knowing what's at stake, which also creates this duality of Armin's childlike dream of seeing the ocean to the actual ignorant bliss of many within the walls. As we've seen many times in this story, pursuing your dreams will get you killed in this world. And I suppose since Armin is the narrator of the story, you can also think of it as him briefly recalling the people he fought for in this very moment. This shot of them staring down the Colossal is absolutely awesome, by the way. Though because this episode really wanted to be the best of Return to Shiganshina, instead of dealing with, I don't know, like 1 or maybe 2 Colossal threats, we deal with 3. So we then pop on over to Mika's squad who are trying to deal with Reiner. Now, I don't want to be mean, but it definitely took them a while to realize that they could just Thunder Spear Reiner's legs, and actually Bertholdt's legs as well. Sending in Lil Ant-Man Eren was not a good idea. But okay, I guess that comes with experience. Also, Reiner's pseudo-amnesia here of him not remembering the Thunder Spears is kinda sorta your typical, oh wow, so convenient amnesia plots. but functionally, it doesn't really change anything, so I don't really have any problems with it. He goes down all the same, and him getting up over and over is just so he can function as this sort of chasing force. We'd see the same exact thing in Liberio, by the way. He's basically a glorified countdown just to build suspense in what is a pretty artificial way, but it does build suspense. But jumping back to Armin, he lies to Eren saying, "I won't let myself die. I've never been that courageous." The dub actually adds the title here with,
I've never exactly been a hero, so...
But man, that Ghibli or Zelda-esque piano in the background is, yes, I will say it once again, absolutely heart-wrenching. Erwin's charge was a defiant scream against death itself. Armin, on the other hand, lies the entire way through. It isn't a fast charge where he gets annihilated by a boulder. No, he takes step after step, knowing full well that his life and his dream, it's over. But Eren then falls down, and let's stop right there because I know there's been a lot of confusion about why is he acting surprised here. The entire plan is based around faking Eren's injuries. It's not like Bathwater can hear Eren's ramblings inside of the Titan, so he has no reason to be doing this whole act, right? I've seen some people say that it might just be a cheeky thrown in line by Isayama to mislead readers and build hype. And I've seen others say that he might be angry that he has to go through with Armin's plan. Personally though, I don't think it's either of those things, and I think there is a much simpler explanation. Bro has to fall 50 meters. Regardless of how well planned that is and what kind of feather falling you have on your boots, I think you'd be swearing to yourself too. But that scene of Armin just gritting his teeth and screaming as he charges the Colossal is so good. And the shot of him facing down the Colossal is also excellent. In the meantime, we have the rest of their squad all encircling Reiner. And while we get a bunch of very ominous, very cool close-ups, the only thing I want to mention in this scene is him ripping up the roof tiles. Look at it, it's so cool. And to continue with that freefall that we are now in, Sasha misses her Thunder Spear, and so, the entire plan falls apart. Like I said, he is there to just build suspense. Okay, but for real, look at even this. This has no right to be this clean after we already saw Levi versus Zeke. Though when we cut to Bertolt, we are right back to despair. And here, note how different this conflict is. There is no mystery behind Bertolt or Armin's actions. We are no longer locked to just one perspective character. We hear both of their inner monologues. Even as recently as Season 2, Marley was still this ambiguous antagonistic mass. Now though, all of that has fallen away, and all that is left is a very human conflict. Bertolt thinks to himself that this is just pathetic. For all the brains Armin had, he's just flailing in the wind, being scorched to death. If you recall what we talked about with Bertolt's personal philosophy on life, I think this is another point of evidence that puts him much closer to someone like Zeke. Just like Zeke, Bertolt hates their suffering. Like we already saw, he considers Armin a dear friend and doesn't hold anything against him. He slept alongside them for years, ate meals with them, and even on the battlefield, begged for help. But at the end of the day, from strictly Bertolt's point of view, he gave them a peaceful way out. They were offered clean and painless deaths. They obviously refused, and so here we are. And man, Armin's VAs absolutely knock it out of the park here. Those small lines of "I can't breathe" in between is just yikes. And again, the fact that we actually hear Bertolt say, "Okay, if this is your last act, I'll make it quick." It cuts so deep because regardless of how gruesome this act actually is, we now know that Bertolt isn't just pure evil killing the scouts for sports. I mean, this sounds ridiculous to say when Armin is literally being cooked alive, but Bertolt tried giving him a way out. For Armin, on the other hand, well, it's the same story we just saw with Erwin. He got so far, he ventured beyond the walls and saw so much more than he could have ever imagined. The weakling who needed his two friends constantly protecting him led entire missions. He uncovered truths that the walls never knew of before. But just like Erwin, he set his heart ablaze and burned to ash. He gave up on his dream and chose to die. In his final moments, he doesn't give a grand speech like Erwin because that isn't him. He is a quiet, introverted, and physically not a strong person, but in spite of that, he will never run away. Even alone, even when facing impossible odds, perhaps foolishly so, but he will stand his ground and never give an inch and never speak a word about it. He willingly throws himself and himself alone into the fiery depths of hell just so that humanity, or maybe even just his friend Eren, gets a glimpse at that endless blue horizon. His final words being just "see it for the both of us" as his body burns white hot is... I think it's the fact that it is so much longer than Erwin's charge that really drives it home, because it's just so horrifying and so incredibly sad that it is just him and him alone. And as if this episode hadn't played with our emotions enough, Hanji rises from the ashes and swoops in with a thunder spear. As Reiner's jaw falls open, we get this absolutely beautiful sequence of Mikasa flipping through the air and sending another thunder spear right down Reiner's throat. And the symphonic suite playing throughout all of this is just perfect. And as the music comes to a close, Bertolt realizes that that is not Eren's Titan. In an instant, his mind connects the dots. All sound becomes muffled, as if the realization was about to make him faint. Eren soars up behind him, and we replicate Trost basically beat for beat. Bertolt's Colossal finally comes crumbling down like some ancient stronghold, shaking the entire world. And just like that, all three of Marley's main fighters went down in a single episode. Now, realistically, yes, Armin should be dead. Of course he should be. He was burned to a crisp and then fell 50, if not a full 60 meters after that. Every bone in his body would have been shattered. Do I care though? Yeah, no, not at all. I will happily complain about magic systems and the colossal poofing. But if Isayama wants to create what is the most insane trolley problem imaginable, then I will happily suspend my disbelief. This balance of telling a story and not undermining the rules of the world is something we'll return to plenty more with Season 4. But with Armin specifically, this is not something I would ever call as inconsistent writing or anything like that. But as we see Eren drag Bertolt to the rest of their squad, his face is just hollow as he thinks to himself that, of course I knew. And with that, we get another tiny little flashback of Kid Armin crying as the now very familiar bully trio walks off. And that is where Armin drops the line of, "I never lost because I never ran away." We linger on Eren's eyes for quite some time. And the question that arises for me is, Eren's keep moving forward. Who is that from? In episode 6, Grisha mentioned that Eren only has one friend, that being Armin. So if he was the first ever person Eren actually befriended and actually liked, could that statement actually come from the supposed weakling Armin, the true hero in this entire story? Well, whatever the case, I don't think there's much of a debate to be had here. Armin is more than deserving of the title hero. Not just because of this episode or even his influence on Eren, but because he is truly selfless. Up until his last moments, he sought a peaceful resolution. He pleaded with Bertolt to just talk it out when everyone told him it's already too late. And when he realized that it was impossible, the first person who he threw in the fray was himself. The sad thing about Armin is that I think for a lot of people, he is massively overshadowed by Erwin. But I think that's kind of the point. He isn't some hardened hype man commander for whom you will happily give your life, because Armin doesn't want you to give your life up for anyone. I think a lot of people simply mistake his compassion for weakness. And so I think it's incredibly fitting that we end this episode with Eren just saying, "I always knew that you were the bravest one out of any of us." And with that, that is episode 54. I think the absolute strongest point of praise I can give this episode is the fact that we literally just had Erwin's charge, and we now know that Armin doesn't die. But the episode still hits just as hard all the same, and that is very hard to pull off. And from a production point of view, I also want to give them massive props for not bringing in the Erwin debates right here at the very end. Again, we know and they know that Armin doesn't actually die, so bringing in the dilemma here at the very end would be like an insane cliffhanger, right? But the adaptation team still said no, let's actually let Armin's sacrifice, that's not actually a sacrifice, still breathe. More than anything, I think it just shows how much they respect the source material. Yeah, they could have pushed up the cliffhanger, but they didn't want to overshadow Armin's story, and Armin's story in this episode, it's beautiful. Why would you want to overshadow that? And that's not to mention that this is the same episode where we had the Levi versus Zeke sequence that, again, took 4 months to make, and the rest of the Titans also went down in the space of like 10 minutes. Yeah, for me, this is definitely the best episode of Return to Shiganshina. Sure, the last one, and maybe even episode 50 with their forces showing up, did have like higher highs, but overall, this one is just unrelenting start to finish. I love it. All that said, next time we are in for one of the heaviest episodes in the entire series, to the point that it doesn't have an intro, it barely has any music, and all it has is a lot of sadness. So, I hope to see you back as we continue overanalyzing Attack on Titan. And that's the video. You know how I've been saying that I've been really dreading writing these scripts because, like, these episodes are just so incredibly dense that it's insane? Yeah, so, about that. The same, of course, goes for the next episode, but perhaps even more so, I'm already expecting the shippers to appear, so, yeah, that's going to be fun. I joke about it, and I don't want to throw any shade at anyone, but, if I were to draw a Venn diagram between shippers and some of the most unhinged comments I've ever seen in my life, well, it does kinda just look like a circle. Whatever the case, though, I am very much looking forward to it. All that said, I want to say a massive thank you to our current patrons and YouTube members who allow me to produce even more of these for you all. And let's also give a warm welcome to the newest member of the team, Jonathan Dr. H. Without you, there'd be a whole lot less of my rambling, so seriously, thank you, thank you. Other than that, I want to say thank you very much for watching, I hope you have a great day, and hopefully, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye!